So we can get
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you very much, all three of you. Can I just point out, my name's Cormac O'Rafferty. Again, I lecture in physics in the south of Ireland. I've been writing about climate change for a while now, mainly for the Irish Times when they let me, which is another story because it's very rarely. But one thing most people who write about this are amazed to find out very quickly is the general public are completely unaware, in fact, that the fossil fuel industry is in fact subsidised. There's a general feeling out there, well, they're the rich ones, they don't need to be subsidised, but in fact they're subsidised all the time, and indeed many of those who complain most and at length about the subsidisation of wind farms, for example, are completely unaware. So that's a piece of information that needs to get out there. And just on Bill's point, and I must say I'm much more inclined to his point in this, I absolutely agree with him, that it seems to me in terms of the divestment process, the key thing there is the longer we leave it, the bigger the crash, basically. If possible at all, it's going to be appalling the longer we leave it. I have to say, I think it was Paul who said, I don't see any danger of overdoing it, let's say. I think climate, this whole argument is a perfect example of something that has been talked to death with no actual results at all. So I'm not at all concerned about any sort of overreaction in the opposite direction. I just don't see any movement at all. And then I'd like to finish with just a third, rather more depressing point. In my writing, anyone who writes about this knows about the sort of abuse you get and the sort of feedback you get. It doesn't all come from people funded to the hilt by the fossil fuel industry. I'm afraid there's plenty of people out there who are crazy all on their own. They don't need money behind them. There's a huge amount of that, and in fact, a lot of it seems to come from a sort of a particular conservative worldview. They can't stand any government of their own nation, never mind a government which somehow would look after the planet. And this seems to be driving this resistance all the time. There's nothing to do with science or anything to do with the climate, and everything to do with a lack of, a complete and utter dislike of any sort of interference. And if Bill in particular, but any of you have any good answers on how to tackle that and how to sort of, explain, give me a way around that viewpoint, I would be very interested. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bill?
Well, I think that you can tell that I'm very much in the spell at the moment of this papal encyclical, having read it carefully now twice, and I'm doing some serious writing about it. One of the things that's most important about it is this powerful description of the common good versus a kind of hyper-individualism. And I think that's what you're getting at with that remark about, which I think is very correct, about people's resistance to, their kind of conservative resistance to being pushed around and told what to do and have government do anything and whatever. Look, we're not going to win over everybody in this fight. There's a certain ideological strain that just won't ever. And that hyper-individualism, which owes more to my country than to any other thing on earth, is exactly, as the Pope says, at the root of it. What we have to do is get the people who recognize that there is a common good, we have to get them engaged in this fight. Our numbers are enough. There's 60 or 70% of people who understand what's going on and that it's a problem and whatever. They're just not deeply engaged in the fight, and there's a couple of reasons for that, but I think the biggest one is that climate change seems so big and we seem so small next to it that there's a kind of inevitable despair that sets in. And the reason that's a powerful idea is because it's kind of true. We are very small next to it, and that's why I was trying to make that point before about our real job is to not be individuals in this fight, it's to join together in movements. And the thing about movements is, even if one doesn't think that whatever they're doing at the moment, divestment or whatever, is the absolutely single best tactic that there could possibly be or whatever, the fact that a large number of other people are engaged in it at any given moment makes it useful, because it's pushing the zeitgeist in the direction that it needs to go. So that's kind of my sense of it. And I think it's a very good reminder, too, just that notion about subsidies is really important, especially because, as you point out, there's this whole critique that you have to subsidize renewable energy in order to make it work. Well, the IMF 3 weeks ago put out a report showing that the global subsidy for fossil fuel is on the order of $5.3 trillion a year if you add up all the costs of climate change. I mean, that's a lot of money. It's way more money than anyone's ever put or ever will put into solar panels or windmills or anything else, and it's really good to keep bringing that home.
All right, this gentleman here with the jumper over his shoulders, please.
Sean Lyons is my name. I'm a retired person. I think you should change the title that you have up there on the board for a particular reason. You should say fossil fuel investment, the Irish case, because quite recently, in the development of passive housing, which will reduce fossil fuel usage, our Department of the Environment set out to penalise a local authority who were going to put it into their development plan. And the question I want to ask is, what do you replace fossil fuel with when you do divest it?
Good question. Paul, how about if you answer that one?
Thank you. Speaking as a lawyer, I'll talk about technology. Right. Fossil fuels, as I said, in an Irish context, are a huge problem. We are blessed in this country, not with a great deal of solar, but certainly with the best wind resources anywhere in Europe. And I think that if you also extend that out to some of the larger infrastructure projects, like the work that's going on around tidal power, again, Ireland is blessed with great natural resources. I know that the current focus of some of the guys in New Era is around stimulating biomass, the biomass industry in Ireland. So three clear examples of how we can use natural or renewable power in place of fossil fuels. And I suppose the other aspect is around the research that's going on about how you make fossil fuels clean. That's something that I think is quite interesting, and we're aware of European oil companies actually starting to put money into research as to how you clean coal, for example. And I think that's quite important, and I think it actually underlines what Bill was saying before about that these large multinationals are kind of beginning to smell that the game of fossil fuels is up.
There's a lady right here in the front, please.
Hi there, Deirdre Lang, People's Climate Ireland, 350 Ireland. So Irish women tend to emigrate more than Irish men. So we have generations of Irish women working overseas in climate justice, doctors, nurses, carers, bankers like myself. So we're all here meeting the challenge of climate justice. Paul, as a banker, the fossil fuel divestment options that we have in Ireland are very limited. As the bankers behind the post office, for example, in Britain, there are phenomenal leaps and bounds in products and risk and innovation and technology we can apply, so both locally in Europe and across seas as well. So in the interest of giving us a fossil-free option, do you think your bank can offer an actual fossil-free fund, for example? So you have an ethical fund, but that includes ExxonMobil, that includes BP and other companies as well. So we're looking for something that can actually help us invest as women. So women work more in agriculture in Europe and across Africa than men. The men manage the budgets, but the women actually earn the money. So on behalf of the women of the world, and thank you, Bill McKibben, for helping us, can we help with the bankers to design a solution that will help us? We don't want to create the fuss like Christine Knight have suggested. We're not fuss makers, we're genuinely budget makers, risk managers who want to make a difference in the name of climate.
I'd be delighted to help all the women of the world. Right. ethical funds and investment. One of the difficulties with ethical funds at the moment in terms of traction, I'm talking from the perspective of being aware of what's going on in the Irish market, is that people aren't just that interested, right? Why aren't they interested? They're not interested because of ignorance. There's a huge education gap, and one of the areas that I think is so important about things like Bill's organisation is that it actually puts people on inquiry. Now, I'm speaking in a personal capacity, but the bank has actually done carbon-linked deposit investments. In fact, it was the first bank to do so about 3 years ago, and that was very well received. So clearly there is somewhat of an appetite, although that was targeted to fairly professional investors. The trick would be to ensure that everybody here has a bank account, everybody here has some sort of pension, is to try and get people, regardless of whether they're men or women, to take responsibility for how that money is being invested on their behalf. And that's where I think the link with...
Your bank is not giving us a vehicle.
Well, there's plenty.
Irish banks are not giving us a vehicle.
There are some out there. Sorry,
Sorry.
intervene. There are investment funds in Ireland. Sorry, there. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's investment funds from various life assurance companies that do offer ethical, not exclusively ethical fossil fuel. No, you're quite right. But there are ethical funds here, and they would include non-fossil fuel energy options, along with others. Pardon?
Exclude fossils. There's no fund in Ireland that excludes fossils.
I don't think there are any. I mean, Paul would know this better than I. I'm not sure that there are exclusive I'm sure there must be.
So now there's
non-ethical,
if there aren't, there should be soon, and somebody will figure out quickly how to make some money doing it, because around the rest of the world it's happening fast. BlackRock has a
The BlackRock
big
Renewables is a big fund. I don't believe that they have any fossil fuels in that renewable fund. And also FTSE for Good is something that's being that has been structured and is available. But Oisín, I take the point. I think one of the difficulties that exist, and this is why I'm so interested in the whole idea about fiduciary duty. There are a good example would be the Eurostoxx 50 index. 30% of the shares that comprise that index would be fossil fuel related. And it might surprise you to know that it's the most popular index which is used to package up investments for individuals. So people are putting money in an index which, if my thesis is correct and there is going to be an adjustment in fossil fuel share values, which is going to be fairly sharp, then you've got people that are actually selling product which is bound to underperform the market. And as I say, and that's why the point I was making about fiduciary duty I think is quite an interesting one.
Okay, we've quite a few questions. This gentleman here with the white hair is asking.
Bill, you mentioned that they can't stop. The oil companies cannot stop. They're on a self-destruct trajectory. They're unreconstructed, and there's nothing that can stop them. Are we not on the same trajectory? We can't stop either. Let me just say that I'm an architect, and I'm in this room at the moment, and I see two things from the 20th century. Electricity, that bundle of electrons that you talk about, and concrete or cement. How do we go into the future with electricity and cement?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, let's just talk about energy for the moment. We all use, at the moment, fossil energy, but most of us don't have any desire particularly to, right? Like, no one thinks to themselves when they flip on the light, I want this to be coming from, I prefer this to come from coal, not solar or something. I mean, if people think about it at all, they'd prefer to have it come from a renewable source. I have a piece in the New Yorker magazine this week about some reporting about across the states about how we've finally reached the point where with all kinds of new technologies, it's now not just necessary but affordable for people to be radically altering their energy footprint. So, old houses in the state where I live in the north of the United States, where they come in over the course of 2 or 3 days and stuff the house full of insulation and put in an air source heat pump and maybe a small solar array someplace. And overnight, the carbon footprint of the house drops 85%, and their electric bill goes down. They finance the whole thing, and the total electric bill goes down. So I don't think we're on this kind of doomsday path necessarily. I mean, I'm in certain ways far more optimistic than I was even 10 years ago, because, as I said before, the price of a solar panel has fallen in that 10 years 80 or 85%, and you can sort of see what the end game might look like. The question is, why, given that we can do this, why aren't we doing it quickly? And it's, I think, because of the political power of those entities. There's plenty of other reasons too, but that's the thing that gets in the way the most. And so that's where we concentrate our efforts. But yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. And I should add with the oil companies that it's not that it's impossible to envision them doing the right thing. I mean, the day that there's a serious price on carbon, the day we break their political power and get a really serious price on carbon, boy, that's the day Exxon's suddenly going to decide that solar panels are a terrific thing. And they have the cash flow and everything else. I mean, if they wanted to, they could own this transition. I mean, they've got billions of dollars coming in the door every week. They and the utilities could be the ones who owned this transition. The problem is they're more comfortable trying to prolong the current state of affairs for another 5 or 10 years.
Bill, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
I was asking, I recently read that Apple, which is a popular and hugely admired company, and probably the richest company in America and probably in the world, are talking about an iCar. Do you think it's the responsibility of other industries, not just the fuel industry, to take some leadership there and perhaps move the world and everybody, for Apple perhaps to do their part too?
No, absolutely. And in fact, Apple's one of these places where, with a lot of sort of pressure and things, they've begun to do some of the right things. Apple has actually done more in terms of green energy for its core business, for data centers and things than just about anybody, though one should keep pushing them. But they've hired the former head of the US EPA, Lisa Jackson, as their sustainability chief, and she's done pretty remarkable things. But yeah, there's room for everybody. The problem is that it's this set of structures around fossil fuel that are the problem. Above all, the fact that there's no price on it. Just keep reminding yourself when you think about this issue, the fact that everybody else pays to put their trash out, okay? I assume that in Ireland you're not allowed to just toss your garbage out in the street. The only exception to that is the fossil fuel industry. They are allowed to toss their trash out for free. That is so warped and distorted the entire, but that's why they're the richest industry on earth, okay? And that's why they work so hard. That's why the Koch brothers will spend $900 million on the next federal election. Think of the size of that perk. And that's why this political fight is necessary. One wishes that it weren't. I mean, look, in a rational world, when scientists told us a quarter century ago, you keep doing this and you're going to wreck the planet, here's what you should do instead, any sort of rationally ordered world would have said, yes, okay, let's get on it. But we didn't, and this is the single biggest reason why.
Gentleman there in the white shirt.
One more question and then we're done.
Thank you. My name is Paul Holden. We've talked a lot over the last couple of days about how to move this whole business up the political agenda. And the problem with that, of course, is that politicians are afraid to make decisions that are going to lose them the election. They tend to follow rather than lead on issues like this. Now, one thing we do know about politicians is that they love publicity. And in particular, they love the idea that they might become heroes in the public's eyes, and particularly on the international stage. And we've seen that with the way Enda Kenny made wonderful speeches saying what great things we were going to do, and then looked for all sorts of derogations to avoid doing those very things.
Have you a question?
Now, the other thing they do is that they will make all sorts of decisions as long as it doesn't involve spending money. Now, we have a Minister for Energy and Natural Resources, and one of his responsibilities is to issue licenses for exploration, from which the country gets almost no benefit. So it would be very easy for him to go to Paris in December and say, Ireland is going to issue no more licenses for oil exploration. And I think that would be a wonderful thing from a symbolic point of view. We would be a country which it says on our land and for the 200 miles around our coast, there's going to be no more coming out of the ground. And that is an opportunity that we have.
That would be a remarkably useful thing globally. It would be really powerful. And you've emphasized one way to reach politicians, which is to allow them the chance to be heroes. And the other way to reach them is to allow them the chance to not be villains. So there's also it's also worth remembering that politicians respond to pain. I mean, we had Barack Obama in this country, in my country, who was as progressive a president as we're going to get. But all that meant was that it was possible to go organize the biggest protests of his administration and chain thousands of people to the wall outside his house and stuff, and there was some chance he would listen. So you got to do both these things, the carrot and the stick with politicians. They're very, they're a little slow, and so you got to help them in all possible ways, would be my advice. But I think that would be I cannot overstate how useful a stand that would be were Ireland to take it. It would really be amazing.
All right, we have to wind up, but I'd like, Christine has asked to say just one more quick word about all of this.
Well, I think it was picked up very strongly in that last question, which is about if we are moving this political agenda, it's really important about how you work together to be focused on it. And I talked about the lobby of Parliament that we had, the Climate Coalition had last Wednesday, and the Climate Coalition, previously known as Stop Climate Chaos, which you have in this country, is about really pulling people together and being focused on it. And one of the big changes for us, you talked, Bill, about the zeitgeist. One of the big changes for us in the Climate Coalition was about moving from a kind of atmosphere of discussion about climate change that was doom and gloom and it's all overwhelming and we can't possibly do anything, to being focused on things that were positive. And we actually used the phrase, for the love of ... And people were actually saying, well, for the love of my children, for the love of chocolate cake, for the love of bees, for the love of the land, for the love of God, for the love of, all that kind of stuff. But it just brought people together. So last Wednesday morning we had the surfers, we had the doctors, we had the beekeepers, we had the rowers, we had the church leaders, we had all these people coming together. We had the Women's Institute, we had bunting everywhere, and it was an atmosphere of party carnival. And MPs, you're not going to disagree with a carnival. Do you know what I mean? Exactly that. Give them a chance to be heroes. But it's a velvet glove, but it's an iron fist. It's an iron fist inside that says, if you don't, we know what we're going to do. We're going to make it happen. Make it happen, guys.
We have to wind up. I'd like to thank all of you for coming to this session. I'd like to thank Bill and Christine and Paul for their contributions. I think what I've taken away from this is that, as Christine has just said, a lot of pressure has to be kept on, but I think we all have to accept that outside of this room, perhaps, all of our friends, our colleagues, our families are not as aware of these issues as we are. Everybody has to accept that they have to perhaps become a bit more knowledgeable about their own money and their investments if it's a matter of divesting out of fossil fuels and putting pressure on the great fossil fuel industry to switch to more sustainable and certainly safer fuel sources for all of us. I think also the question of affordability is something that we're all going to have to address, and the sacrifice perhaps that's going to have to be made if we do change the way that we power our world. And I think what's also extremely interesting, and this is something that we should all be reading up a lot more about, and that is the massive subsidy of our taxes and of the finances of this country that are going to support the industry that has caused so much damage. So again, thank you all for attending this particular session.